Disabilities Act passed. And that's why we did it. We didn't do it to make employers unhappy. We didn't do it to upset anybody. We didn't do it as the Lawyers Annuity Act of 1990. We did it so people like Art Honeyman could have pancakes at 3 in the morning. We did it so that the beautiful children with disabilities in this world could have something that each and every one of us has, the ability to have a spontaneous life where they can decide to go do something and just go do it without asking if they can, without wondering whether they're welcome, without being afraid of people's reaction. That is why we did it. You here today are here to celebrate not anything that I did. You're here to celebrate who we did it for. People with disabilities. I want to tell you what I've learned. I used to know more than I do now. But I'm older now. And I've realized much of what I thought was true really wasn't. But there's two things that remain true. And I'll tell you what they are. And I'm sure of them. The first one is this. There is nothing wrong with people with disabilities. There is just something wrong with the way we react to them. The problem lies in our reaction, not in their reality. In our fear. And two, and I say this for every counselor, every job developer, every parent, everyone who cares or loves someone with a disability. But more importantly, I say this to everyone with a disability, and especially the young people with disabilities. This is the last and most important thing that I know. The shortest distance between where a young person with a disability is and where they want to be is a road that is illuminated by their own dreams, not by the dreams of anyone else. No matter how much we care about them, no matter how much we think we know, no matter how many degrees we have under our belts, we will never have a better understanding of someone's music than they will have of their own. The only people who deserve to serve and work with people with disabilities are not those who tell them what they cannot do, and not those who tell them what they can do, but those who ask them what they wish to do and enable them to do it. And everyone else needs to get a job selling Tupperware. The problem is, you can't sell Tupperware unless you have friends. So I don't think they'll be very successful. I have a challenge for you. I want you to think about those people who've made a difference in your life and how they did that. There are people who made a difference in my life. My grandmother certainly was one. Old Joe was one. Hey, who's Old Joe? Old Joe was my grandma's boyfriend. Old Joe lived in the basement, allegedly. And when the welfare people would come, And is anyone old enough to remember that the welfare people would come to your house and inspect your house to make sure you didn't have nice stuff? Does anyone remember that? I'm serious. Remember how humiliating that was? You must have been a child at the time. How humiliating. I remember my grandmother crying after they left. They would come and they'd look in my grandma's purse to see if she had money she shouldn't have. They'd look in her closet to see if she had clothes she couldn't account for. They'd look in the refrigerator to see if she had food that was better than we were supposed to have. And then they'd look at old Joe. Who's he? It's old Joe. Where does he sleep? Does he sleep with Grandma? Old Joe sleeps in the basement. Richard, does old Joe sleep with your grandma? No. Old Joe sleeps in the basement. I sleep with Grandma. That's how I got that cereal. And then they'd say, well, does he pay rent? No. Then why do you let him sleep in the basement? And Grandma was a product of the Depression. And everyone who was raised in the Depression turned their backyard into a garden. You know this to be true. Because they would never be without food. And Grandma would say, old Joe tends my garden. And it wasn't until I got to college and took Victorian poetry until I realized that Grandma was telling the truth. Old Joe had been tending her garden for some time. Old Joe changed my life. You say, how did he do that? He taught me chess. How'd that change your life? Well, it didn't. But I talked to him. I wouldn't talk at school. I was voluntarily mute until the 6th grade. Never said a word in public. For lots of reasons. I was one of 7 children. 6 of them died. My mother had postpartum depression and believed that I had died at birth. She couldn't deal with the fact that I was still alive. She put me in an orphanage for 3 years and wouldn't tell anyone where I was. When I got out of the orphanage, I just wouldn't talk. Grandma raised me. But I would talk to old Joe at home. And I'd tell him all my fears. I'd tell him all my dreams. I'd tell him about Jimmy Brown who stole my trike and broke the police siren off it. And I wanted him to go kill Jimmy Brown. And I wanted him to buy me a new trike. And I wanted him to slay all my dragons. And take his checkbook out and make my life so happy. And he never did any of it. He'd just sit over the chessboard and I'd talk to him. And then he'd say, it's your move. And after I moved, he'd say, are you sure you really want to do that? I later became a counselor and realized I could make a good living by just saying those 2 things over and over again. I believe it's all Dr. Phil has. How did Joe change my life? He was always there to listen. I couldn't tell him anything so horrible that he wouldn't love me just as much after I told him as before. Who is there to listen to you? Who is there never to judge you? Who is there to defend you? Who is there that always had time for you? How do they change your life? Amazing. But more importantly, who are you listening to today? Who are you not judging today? Who do you find time for today? Whose life are you changing today? Mrs. Muir, 7th grade teacher. I'd begun to talk, finally. Mrs. Muir wanted to be a speech teacher. It's all she ever wanted to be. She went to college to be a speech teacher. She couldn't get hired at the high school to be a speech teacher because there was a teacher glut. So she took a job as a 7th grade teacher. That's when they put me in 7th grade. I spent the rest of my time in special ed. The first day we all had to give a speech, 2-minute speech. When I got up, whoa, everyone gave a 2-minute speech. I gave a 10-minute speech. I had an introduction, 3 points, 2 points supporting each of my 3 points, and a conclusion to wrap back around to the introduction. She said, "Who are you?" I said, "I'm the retarded kid." She said, "Do you want to learn to be a speaker?" I said, "Will it get me out of homework?" She said, "Yeah." And she taught me to be an orator, a debater, an extemp speaker, an impromptu speaker. By the time I got out of the 7th grade, I was as good as any high school junior in the state. I wanted to hug her. And she put her hands up and said, "Don't hug me. I'm your 8th grade teacher too." And I spent another year with her. By the time I got out of that, I was as good as any college sophomore in the state. If you'd have dug up Lincoln and Douglas, I'd have debated them and beat them both. She changed my life. You say, because she taught you. No, that's not why she changed my life. She changed my life because of what happened between the 7th and 8th grade. She was offered the job as a speech coach at the local high school. And she turned it down. She turned it down to spend another day, another year, teaching me. And she never told me what she did. She never told me the sacrifice she made. She did it in silence and in the dark. I never found out what she had sacrificed until I went to her funeral and her husband told me so many years later. Who sacrificed for you? Who sacrificed for you willingly and gladly? And more to the point, who are you sacrificed? Who are you sacrificed for now? Anybody? Whose life are you changing? If numbers had applied to Vietnam, that would have meant that 55,000 of us would have come back and killed ourselves. Even the government would have had to pay attention to that. We need to ask ourselves a simple and important question. If as many veterans have killed themselves after coming back as died in combat, which then is the more hostile environment? Iraq or Indiana? And what are we doing to help them back? Went to Fort Hood, and we're showing the movie in their theater there, and it was an ominous day because it was a day that they extended the tour from 12 months, I think, to what, 18 months? And they had all these soldiers there, many of them ready to go to Iraq. Ollie North was there. I don't know why we let Ollie in. He was a Marine. But he was there. And we showed the movie. And I remember a veteran stood up. And he said, "Mr. Pimentel, I'm going for my 2nd tour in Iraq. Going to leave in about 3 weeks." He said, "When I got back from my first tour, I was treated pretty well." He said, "Couldn't buy a beer in a bar. People got up out of their seat in first class and gave